Welcome to another episode with Math with Coach John. And today we are going to be doing adding and subtracting integers. Now, anytime we say integers, basically all that we mean is just talking about a whole number. So we're not talking about fractions, no decimals. It's just a whole number, a number like a 3, a 5, 6, just regular whole numbers. But the difference with an integer is that it could be positive or negative numbers. Okay. So a lot of kiddos and even adults alike, once negatives started getting in the mix, that's when they said math went all downhill for them. But don't worry, Mathletes, we got you. We're going to get you squared away here to where you'll feel comfortable and feel like, hey, I have no problem with adding and subtracting integers. And this is something that we do want to get comfortable at. And because as the higher up you go in your math, this will be really a skill that we need to feel comfortable with. Okay. So as we start getting into the algebras, algebra 2s, and all of those things and up, we'll see integers a lot. So we want to feel comfortable with it. Now, multiplying and dividing integers, the steps are a little different. So we'll have a future video that will show us how to deal with that. So if you're like, I don't really know how to multiply or divide integers either, don't worry, we'll have a video for you there as well. But today we're going to focus on adding and subtracting integers. All right. So here's what we got with our first question. We got 5 questions we're going to work on today, Mathletes. So we're going to look at these 5. And the first one is 3 minus 8. Okay. Now, if we notice with that 3, again, if there's really no sign in front of it. If you ever see a number that's the lead number, it's the first number in the expression, and you look and there's no positive, no negative, no sign at all, that just means it's a positive number. So that 3 right there is considered positive. And then when it says minus 8, that minus is basically signifying that 8 is a negative number, okay? Now, these are 2 things I want you to know when we're talking about integers, okay? And there's a special word here. And the first one is same. If we're adding and subtracting integers, and there's 2 numbers that have the same sign, that means they're both positive numbers or they're both negative numbers. If we are in that situation, what we're going to do is we are going to add and keep the sign. So I'm going to put add and keep, okay? So I'm just going to stick that up there just so we can have it as a reference point now, okay? Now, if we ever look at the 2 numbers and they have different signs, one's a positive and one's a negative, they have different signs. Okay, if we're in that situation, different is going to mean subtract. So I'm going to put subtract, okay? And we'll talk about what to do after we subtract, okay? All right, but notice I put same in green and I put different as subtract. You don't have to do this when you're working out these expressions, but sometimes if you got two colored pencils that are different colors and you can rewrite the equation in the different colors, it can really help you as far as knowing, am I adding or subtracting? So let me give you an example here. All right, so we have 3 minus 8, okay? So I'm going to write all my positive numbers in green, and I'm going to write my negative numbers in orange, okay? So right here, I'm going to rewrite this expression, 3 minus 8. I'm going to keep the 3 in green because it is a positive number. But now I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to write, because it's a minus 8, that means that 8 is a negative. I'm going to write that in orange, okay? And here's where I was talking about how or why writing it in the different colors can help us. When they're in different colors, it makes it very obvious they have different signs. One's positive and one's negative. Okay, and remember what we wrote at the top. What do we do if the signs are different? We subtract, okay? So here, I have a positive 3 and a minus 8 because they're different signs. That means we're going to subtract. So 8 minus 3 is a 5, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that's our final answer. It just means 8 minus 3 is 5. So now most students will say, okay, was it a positive 5, Coach John, or is it a negative 5? Okay, here's how we'll tell that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at just the base number. I have a 3 and I have an 8. Now, I'm not talking about if it's a positive 8 or a negative 8 or any of those things, just the base number itself, a 3 and an 8. And if I asked you which number is bigger, is a 3 bigger or is an 8 bigger? Hopefully, we would all say 8. 8 is larger than a 3, okay? So after we subtract, we're going to take the sign of whichever number is bigger. So since the 8 is bigger than 3 and the 8 had a negative sign, that means our answer has to be a negative 5. So if they have different signs, we're going to subtract and we'll take the sign of the bigger number. All right. So let's get to another one. So the next question, and that's our final answer too, by the way, Mathletes. All right. So we're going on to the second one. I have a negative 6 and a minus 5. Now, if I rewrite that, we said we're going to write our negative numbers in orange. So I'm going to pull out my orange marker here. I have to rewrite the expression. I have a negative 6 and I have a minus 5. They're both negatives. So when I look at that, you see how they're the same color? They're the same color. They're both orange because they're both negative numbers. So when we see that same color, sometimes it can remind us that, hey, they're the same. And what do we do when we have 2 integers when we're adding or subtracting to have the same sign. What do we say to do? We said to add and keep the sign. So -6, -5, we're going to add. 6 plus 5 is 11, and we keep the sign. Both were negative numbers, so we kept the sign negative, and we added them and made it 11, and that is your final answer. So just like that, we've already knocked out 2 mathletes. All right, so I'm moving that to the side, and now we're going to bring on our next 2 questions. All right, so now we're going to get a little tougher because those were 2 single-digit numbers. Now we're going to be working on expressions that have 2 double-digit numbers, okay? But everything is going to be the same as far as our approach, okay? So remember, if the 2 integers have the same sign, okay, we're going to add and keep the sign, okay? And if they have different signs, we're going to subtract. And of course, we take the sign of the bigger number. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to look at here. So looking at here, I have a -13 and a +28, okay? So all the negative numbers we said we're going to write in orange. So I'm going to write that -13 in orange. But when I look at the 28, that's a +28 or +28. So I'm going to write that in green. Okay. So when we look at this, mathletes, they have different signs because they're different colors. That's a reminder that we have different signs. One's a negative, one's a positive. So what do we say to do in those cases? We subtract. Okay. Now, doing a -13 plus 28, subtracting those numbers in your head would be a lot more difficult. So what we're going to do is I'm going to write it to the side and I'm going to write it in vertical, just like we would in a normal 2-digit numbers. If we're going to subtract, we would write them vertically. That's what I'm going to do over here. Now, when I'm just looking at the base numbers, I have a 28 and I have a 13. Since a 28 is bigger than a 13, I'm going to write that on top. And again, I'm not worried about the signs. I'm just talking about the number itself. So I have a 28 and that's a positive number. So I'm going to keep that green. And then I had a 13, which was a negative number. And when we look here, when we change the order around, we actually got just a typical subtraction problem. So here I'm ready to go ahead and rock and roll. We're just going to subtract them. 8 minus 3 is 5. 2 minus 1 is 1. Okay. And again, because the 28 is bigger and it was a positive number, our answer should stay positive. And so 15 is our final answer. All right, we're cruising. All right, so when I come down to the 4th question here, I got a -16 and a -14. Now, I'm going to remember all of our negative numbers we said we're going to write in orange. So I'm going to put -16 and the 14 is a negative as well. So I'm going to put -14. And so if we look at this, mathletes, again, they got the same color, or in other words, they have the same sign. So what do we do in those cases? We add and keep the sign. So, but again, 16 and 14, that would be tough to do in our head. So I'm going to rewrite it over here. I'm going to -16 and a -14. I'm going to write them vertically, a lot easier to work with. Okay. But remember, we said we're going to add these numbers because they have the same sign. We're going to add and keep the sign. So we know our answer, because these are negative numbers, our answer's got to be negative because we said we're going to keep the sign the same. And so now we're just ready to add. 6 and 4 is 10. So right here, 6 plus 4 is 10. So I'm going to put my 0, carry my 1. And then 1 plus 1 is 3. And then there you go. So -16 minus 14 is -30. All right, mathletes, we got one more. So I'm going to move this over. Here's our last one. Now this one, I'm going to throw a little curveball at you because the other ones we were doing with 2 numbers, whether it was 2 2-digit numbers or 2 single-digit numbers. Now I got 3 numbers, okay? So I have an expression, -3 minus 4 plus 5, okay? But remember, when we're going to look at 2 numbers at a time, we always do the same thing. If they have the same sign, we're going to add and keep. And I'm just writing this up there, guys, always just as a reference point to remind us what to do, okay? So if they have the same sign, we're adding and keeping the sign. If they have different signs, okay, we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number, okay? Now, when we talk about orders of operations, we don't have to worry about that in this expression because there's no multiplication, division. There's really no other operation happening here outside of subtracting or adding. So because of that, we could just go left, or we don't have to worry about doing, okay, I got to start in the back of the problem or anything like that, because this isn't really orders of operations because it's just adding and subtracting. So we're just going to go from left to right. And what that means is we're going to start with, we're not going to worry about the +5. This +5 we're going to worry about later. We're going to focus on the first 2 numbers, okay? And I'm going to rewrite because they're negative. That -3, we said we're going to write our negatives in orange. So I'm going to put -3, and then that's also a minus. So I'm going to put -4, okay? And we'll worry about that +5 like we said in a little bit. So I have a -3 minus 4. It's the same color. They're both written in orange. So what does that mean? Same. They have the same sign. So we're going to add and keep the sign, okay? We're going to add and keep the sign. Why? Because they're both negative numbers. They have the same sign. So we're going to add and keep the sign. So -3 minus 4, we're going to add them. 3 plus 4 is 7. And we keep the sign, which in this case was negative. Those two numbers were negative, so our answer has to be negative. And so right there, we have a -7. Okay. So that means for this part right here, that -3 minus 4 was -7. So I'm going to substitute that with a -7. But then in the back end, remember, we still got that +5. So I'm going to bring that in the mix now. Okay. So now I'm looking, I have a -7 and a +5. Now notice they're written in different colors. Okay. One's orange and one's green because they're different colors. That means we're working with this different. They have different signs. One's a negative, one's a positive. And anytime you got two numbers that have different signs, we subtract and we'll keep the sign of the bigger number. Okay. So here, a 7 minus a 5, okay, would be 2. And when I look at the number, which number is bigger? I'm just going to look at the base number, not worried about the signs, but just the base. I have a 7 and I have a 5. Remember, we said we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. Well, 7 is bigger than a 5. And since a 7 in this case has the negative, we're going to make that answer negative. So -7 plus 5 would be -2. All right, Mathletes, that's it for this episode. We added and subtracted integers. Just a reminder, remember, integers are just simply whole numbers, no decimals, no fractions, just regular whole numbers that they're either positive or negative. Okay. So we were learning how to add and subtract positive and negative numbers. Okay. And remember, we're going to have a future video coming out this week that's going to be multiplying and dividing integers. So we're going to learn how to multiply and divide positive and negative numbers. We got that to look forward to. And if you could subscribe, hit that like button, really would appreciate it. And remember, if there's any skills or different things that you may need help with, just put it in the comment section so we can make videos to get you squared away with that as well. And we'll talk to you soon.